The name of the new chapter we are going to study is the French Revolution. So, on 14 July 1789, King commanded the troops to move into the city, and then rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open up the fire upon the citizens. So, group of many hundreds of people, they marched towards the eastern part of the city and they stormed into the fortress prison, the Bastille, which they hoped to where they hoped to find the ammunition. And then the commander of Bastille was killed and the prisoners were released. Bastille was hated by all because it stood for the despotic power of the king. Most people were protesting against the high price of the bread. So, beginning of a chain of events ultimately led to the execution of the king in France. Though most people at that time they did not anticipate this outcome. French society during the late 18th century. Long years of war drained the financial resources of the France. Under the Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies to gain their independence from their common enemy, that is Britain. To meet the regular expenses such as cost of maintaining the army, the court, running the government offices or universities, the state was forced to increase the taxes. So French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budget on interest payments alone. French society in the 18th century was divided into three estates. Term old regime is used to describe the society and institutions of France before 1789. Members of the first two estates, that is the clergy and the nobility, they enjoyed certain privileges by birth. Nobles further enjoyed feudal privileges like feudal dues which they extracted from the peasants. Peasants were also obliged to render services to the lord, to work in his house and fields and also to serve in the army and also to participate in building of the roads. Church also extracted the share of taxes called tithes from the peasants. And finally, all members of the third estate had to pay taxes to the state. Burden of financing activities of the state through taxes, it was borne by the third estate alone. The struggle to survive. So, increasing population in the year 1789, it led to a rapid increase for the demand for food grains. Production of food grains could not be kept in pace with the demand, so the price of bread, which was the staple diet of majority of people, it rose rapidly. So in this image we see the struggle of survival. And things became worse whenever drought or hail reduced the harvest, and this led to a subsistence crisis, something which occurred frequently in France during the old regime. Growing middle class envisages an end to the privileges. So the 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups known as middle class. They earned their wealth through expanding overseas trades, from the manufacture of goods such as woolen, silk textiles, which were either exported or brought by the richer members of the society. So, in addition to merchants and manufacturers, third estate also included professionals such as lawyers, administrative officials, and all of these were educated and believed that no group of the society should be privileged by birth. Rousseau, a philosopher, he carried the idea forward, proposing a form of government based on social contract between the people and their representatives. Another philosopher, known as Montesquieu, he proposed the division of power within the government between the legislative, executive, and the judiciary. And this model of the government was put in force in the USA after the 13 colonies declared independence from Britain. American Constitution and its guarantee of individual rights. This was an important example for political thinkers in France. News that Louis XVI is planning to impose further taxes to able to meet the expenses of the state. Outbreak of the revolution on 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the Estates General to pass proposals for new taxes. So first and second estate people, they sent 300 representatives. They were seated in rows facing each other on two sides, and 600 members of the third estate, they had to stand at the back. Third estate was represented by most prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans, women, they were denied entry into the assembly. Members of the third estate, they demanded that voting now be conducted by the assembly as a whole, where each member would have one vote. Representatives of the third estate, they viewed themselves as spokesmen for the whole French nation. On 20th June, they declared themselves as National Assembly. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of the France is seethed with turmoil. And after spending hours in the long queues of the bakeries, crowds of angry women they stormed into the shops. At the same time, the king ordered the troops to move into the Paris. So on 14 July, the agitated crowd stormed and destroyed the Bastille. On 4th August 1789, Assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of obligations and taxes. Tithes were abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. France becomes a constitutional monarchy. In the year 1791, National Assembly completed the draft of the constitution. The main objective of this was to limit the powers of the monarch. Powers, instead of being concentrated in the hands of one person, they were now separated and assigned to different institutions such as legislature, executive and judiciary, and this made France a legislative assembly. Men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to 3 days of laborer wage were given the status of active citizens, which means they were entitled to vote. Remaining men and women, they were classed as passive citizens. Rights such as right to live, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before the law, they were established as natural and inalienable rights. France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. Louis XVI, who has signed the constitution, he entered into secret negotiation with the King of Prussia. Rulers of the other neighboring countries were worried by the developments in France and they made plans to send troops to put down the events that have been taking place. But before this could happen, the National Assembly voted in April 1792. They declared war against Prussia and Austria. People revolted against the kings and aristocracies all over the Europe. Revolutionary wars, they brought loss and economic difficulties to the people. Men were away at fighting. Women were left alone to cope up with the tasks of earning a living. Large sections of the population, they were convinced that the revolution had to be carried further. Political clubs, they became an important rallying point for people who wished to discuss government policies and plan their forms of action. The most successful of this club was Jacobins. Members of the Jacobin Club belonged to the less prosperous sections of society like shopkeepers, artisans, shoemakers, pastry cooks, watchmaker, printer, and as well as servants and daily wage workers. Their leader was Maximilian Robespierre. Jacobins came to be known as sans-culottes, means those without knee breeches. On the morning of August 10th, they stormed into the palace of Tuileries. Elections were held. From now on, men above 21 years of age. Next is the Reign of Terror. So period from 1793 to 1794. This is referred as the Reign of Terror. Robespierre, he followed a policy of severe control and punishment. If the court found them guilty, they were guillotined. Guillotine is a device consisting of two poles and a blade with which a person's head is beheaded. So in this image we see a guillotine. Robespierre's government, it issued laws placing a maximum ceiling on wages and prices. Meat and bread were rationed. Peasants were forced to transport their grain to the cities and sell it at prices fixed by the government. Churches were shut down. Buildings were converted into barracks or offices. This Robespierre, he was finally convicted by a court on July 1794. Arrested, on the next day he was sent to the guillotine. A directory rules the France. Fall of the Jacobin government. It allowed the wealthier middle class to seize the power. New constitution was introduced which denied the vote to non-propertied sections of society. It provided for two elected legislative councils. These then appointed a directory which is an executive made up of 5 members. Political instability of the directory. It paved the way for the rise of military dictators, that is Napoleon Bonaparte. Ideals of freedom, equality before the law and fraternity, they remained inspiring ideas that motivated political movements in France and also rest of the Europe during the following century. Did women have a revolution? So from the very beginning, women were active participants in the events which brought so many changes in the French society. Women of the third estate, they had to work hard for a living. They worked as seamstresses, laundresses, they sold flowers, fruit, vegetables at the market. They were also employed as domestic servants in the houses of prosperous people. Only daughters of nobles or wealthier members of third estate, they could only study at the convent, after which their families arranged a marriage for them. Wages were lower than those of men. 60 women clubs, they came up in different French cities. Women were disappointed that the Constitution of 1791 reduced them to passive citizens. They demanded the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and also to hold the political office. In the early years, the revolutionary government introduced laws which helped improve the lives of the women. Together with the creation of state schools, schooling was also made compulsory for all the girls. Women's struggle for equal political rights continued. In 1946, women in France won the right to vote. Abolition of slavery, most important revolutionary social reform of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. Throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in the France. National Assembly held long debates whether the rights of man should be extended to all the French subjects, including those in the colonies. The revolution in everyday life, important law that came into effect soon after storming of the Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship. The Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed the freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. So this was one way they could grasp and identify with ideas such as liberty, justice, that political philosophers wrote about at length in text which only a handful of educated people could read.